Greetings, friends. Mkwann here, and we got ourselves an old-fashioned Susquehanna alchemy presentation / demonstration. And so, particularly for those of you who've been following along on this journey for the past year or so, this is going to be a culmination of all of the stories and adventures I've shared. But what it will also be, and for those who've been following along and for those that this is, they're just kind of jumping on right now, is a demonstration of reality, how reality in this realm works. And there won't be conclusions. I'm not going to necessarily give a conclusion, but what we will see in play is two things. One is perhaps an order or a structure that seemingly exists beneath the notion of what appears to be chaotic unfolding of life. And also looked at or in play or a question is the relationship between cause and effect of events. And so, as I said, there's not a conclusion. There's not a hard takeaway. The purpose of this presentation is to have an experience. And in order to have this experience, this is an experience purely in consciousness. It purely exists within the mind field, within your mind space. The technique which I would encourage is to resist the urge to name or to define all of this, the data points, if you will, which I will walk us through in this presentation. Resist the urge to define what's going on. Resist the urge to want to poke holes in the story. Resist the urge to want to get lost in the story. What you just want to do is to be able to follow along with your rational mind, but find that sweet spot where you can see what's happening, but you're not limiting it, what it is. You're not limiting it by naming it. And in that space is where the potentiality for something else to take shape, something which has not been named. For how this realm works is as you begin to name something, as you begin to say, this is what this is, reality begins to render around that. But if you can hold that space of observation without labeling, well, then a more natural, or maybe said another way, the structure and the mystery of life has space to unfold. Hopefully that makes sense. So with that being said, let's just jump right in. So the container of this story are really these two events in time and space. And so we begin with the first point, which is April 8th, 2024. And if you can go back in your memory, that was the date of the big solar eclipse from last spring, which was visible across parts of North America, which got a lot of mainstream attention. And I myself was also participant in that event. And so at that event, not only was there a solar eclipse, but I began the start of a River and Stars ceremony tour. And it started at Sunbury, Pennsylvania on the Susquehanna River. Sunbury, because the word sunbury implies a buried sun, which is an eclipse. So this was like the linking of the logic of this river and stars ceremony with place and space. And as this was occurring, NASA, the official mainstream paradigm agency, which is the filter in which the celestial realm is kind of understood, they were having a viewing party, which they were live streaming on their NASA stuff in Kerrville, Texas, at a park which was just along the Guadalupe River. So these are two different kind of river and stars ceremony tied into the eclipse. And so the endpoint in time and space in which we'll make this container, in which we will go and see how it unfolds, is the July 4th, 2025, so just a week ago, the flooding which hit Texas, and it hit, most notably, Kerrville, which is the same location as this April 8th date where NASA had their viewing party of the eclipse. And so in the midst of these two endpoints in time, we have the September 26th Asheville flood. The Asheville flood. So there's a resonance, if you will, between like big floods in the United States and stuff like that. So that's the container. So we want to begin now by looking at these as marker dates. We're going to use April 8th and July 4th as the end point and the beginning point. And life is a never-ending unfoldment, if you will. You could look at it as a spiral or as a wave, all these sort of things. And within this never-ending or continuous unfolding, that you can pick any sort of endpoints. I mean, this is the nature of reality. You pick anything within that continuum and you can work off it. And these are these points of Kerrville and this Guadalupe River are our endpoints, and we can measure them in days, solar cycles, like sunrise to sunrise events. And from this date to this date was 452 days. And when we add in this September 26th date, like a point in this continuum of time, we see that this 452 divides up into 171 days until the Asheville flood, and then 281 days until the Kerrville flood. And when you look at the ratio, so the ratio of 171, the relationship, the mathematical relationship of 171 to 281, we see that it's split up this way, .621 and .379. And that is almost exactly the golden ratio. The golden ratio, or the Fibonacci sequence, if you're familiar with that number, which is a approximation of the golden ratio or the phi ratio, is built within this container of time and events. And even more, or also adding to the behind the scenes structuring, if you will, is this 281 days. For 280 days in the human experience is a rather significant time frame, for it takes 280 days from conception and birth to birth, the human gestation period. Like that is the general ideal time frame. Most births don't hit on 280, but that's the number which is the, if you will, maybe the median or the ideal. So let's go look at the receipts. So April 8th, September 26th, July 4th. This is the day counter. We see that's where the 452 comes from April 8th to July 4th. And then we can see from September 26th. So this is the overall time period. And then 281 is the time of the Asheville flood to the Kerrville flood. So that's where those numbers come. And you see where they're 281 divided by 452 gets us this number, which is very, very close to the phi ratio, right? The phi ratio refers to the golden ratio and is known as the golden number, the golden proportion, the divine proportion, which is approximately equal to 1.618033. If you know math, it's like 0.618 to 1 to 1.618, but you know, if math isn't your thing, just trust me on it. And we see right here that this golden ratio is significant because of its connection to efficient and harmonious growth patterns, and we see it throughout the natural world. So said another way is this realm, the natural baseline structure of our reality of being in body on this thing called Earth, this ratio shows itself time and time again in how life unfolds. So when we see that very clearly as it relates to phenomenon like you know, how pine cones are made, or the structure of the DNA, or you know, birth patterns of rabbits, like proportions within the human body. We see the golden ratio. But now we can see how the golden ratio isn't just material. It also can show itself in events measured through time. We're seeing the same sort of ordered structure. We can't see the golden ratio. We don't know why it shows itself, but what we can do is identify that this sort of pattern shows itself time and time again. So that's where we begin. And then right here, so the human gestation period is the period of development inside the womb, and it typically lasts for 40 weeks or 280 days. Days are a real measurement, weeks not so much, but within the paradigm calendar system, we do use weeks, and 40 is also a very significant resonating number, particularly shown, or where that 40 really has grounded itself in consciousness is through the Bible. You know, whatever the Bible may be, 40 days, 40 years, 40, you know, those are a recurring of, those are multiple events of trial and tribulation tied to this number of 40 and time. And so we can see that's tapped in again to the whole human development. But again, going back to this, we see embedded in this structure of events not only the natural golden ratio, but then also something of the symbol of giving birth, All right. So now we're going to get deep into this. And what we're going to get deep into is all falling within this container of time and three primary events, which are all structured in this golden proportion. So the other themes which we're going to talk about here, besides the golden ratio, is the resonance expressed through the day count, anchored on a solar eclipse, is this idea of powerfully destructive floods, the comparison of the Kerrville, Camp Mystic, sort of Austin, Texas. We'll understand why we connect this to Austin in a moment, and then Asheville. And then also tied into this is this idea of not just rivers, but then the underlying implication of river goddess worship. And here, the rivers which we're going to be talking about, they're really going to be 4 rivers. There's the Susquehanna, and then the Seine in France, which used to be known as Sequana. I've talked about this topic many times, but we'll go back to this. The French Broad River that goes through North Carolina and goes through Asheville, and then the Guadalupe River. And then the third thing which we're going to look at is this idea of ceremony, both very, very, we're going to look at conscious ceremony, like done on purpose. And then we're also going to look at this idea of occultic ceremony, meaning that the ceremony is hidden. The participants in it are not recognizing that they're in a ceremony, but make no mistake, this is a ceremony. And we will be looking at maybe private ceremonies in comparison to paradigm ceremonies. So let us begin. Or let's go one layer deeper. So let's go back to this April 8th, 2024, day 0. Sunbury, Pennsylvania, Kerrville, Texas. So if you go back in time, you look at the videos which I was putting out early 2024, and through the first half, maybe through June or July of 2024, I talked about this Susquehanna Alchemy River and Stars Tour, Cosmic Geomancy ceremony dates. The idea behind that was going to these different places along the Susquehanna River and 2 other rivers that resonate with the Susquehanna River, and doing water weaving, like literally going and taking water from one location and then bringing it to the other location and mixing the water and adding it back, adding part of it back into the river, and then going to another location. And as this was happening, on the starboard, replicating the location of all of the heavenly bodies, replicating them on the starboard. So there's an as below on the ground of what's going on in the heavens. That's the stars, and then the river is the water weaving. So that was this whole sort of event, and it began on April 8th, the solar eclipse at Sunbury, PA. And so this here's the Kerrville Eclipse Festival. This is from NASA's own, their website. And they're saying this in-person NASA-hosted event, April 8th, to be done in Kerrville, Texas. So that's what I'm talking about. This is the location of where the River and Stars ceremony took place. This is the Kerrville one. The event was held at Louise Hayes Park in Kerrville, Texas on April 8th. Here's Louise Hayes Park, and you can see it's right along the Guadalupe River. Here's the poster. This is the relationship to the 2. This is where Sunbury is, and this is where Kerrville is. Approximately 1,425 miles apart from each other. And just to I was unaware. I guess I knew that this was happening. I knew I knew that the solar eclipse was a mainstream event in a way that other solar eclipses are not a mainstream event. A solar eclipse happens more or less every 6 months, and they usually come and go, and it's not a big deal for the mainstream paradigm world. But for this April 8th one, that was a big deal, at least in North America. There was a lot of hype around it. So there was a lot of collective consciousness, awareness on this event. And I was piggybacking off of that. The motivation for this River and Stars tour came from this idea of aero circulation mission. And I've talked about this a lot over the past year. And when this was like the idea of leaning into the arrow circulation mission. It was done with like an internal directive. Okay, this is what I'm going to do. Why am I doing this? Because internally, this is where I am inspired to want to do this action, but without any sort of real expectation of what the outcome would be, but clarity as to the why and the what I will be doing. And so this is probably the best definition which I had for what this River and Stars Cosmic Geomancy Ceremony Tour was about. And it says, by definition, this is from some guys, from someone's essay, which was written in 2012, but it had to do with arrow circulation. And Peter Kingsley's book, Story Waiting to Pierce You. From the essay, which was inspired by that, it says, by definition, a new era, a revolution in thought, cannot grow out of the dichotomies and structures, the being of the past, which defined the shape of possibility. It's exactly what I was talking about in the beginning of this video. I'm like, can you hold that space where you are following along in this narrative, this story I'm telling you, but not limited it by saying like, this is what it is. Just kind of being conscious enough of the story, but loose enough without the naming. That is being able to find a space outside of the past. As soon as you name it, that's the past. So they're saying a new era, a revolution in thought can only come from a space outside of what we know. The future, going back to this, the future must be created afresh by those who are able to journey into the undifferentiated ground that underlies being, and to bring back a new dispensation from the gods and the ancestors. This is the task of skywalkers who visit heaven and the underworld, and then they become arrow circulators. So this idea of going to, quote unquote, the heavens and the underworld and doing this for the purpose of creating something new, that act is called, or is arrow circulation. So that's where this word comes from. And by doing so, this is a casting a sacred circle round a land to consecrate it for a new destiny. So that was the motivation for this. Like, I don't know what that's going to be, but I'm like, that felt true. So let's step into this. Let's really embody what that would look like. And so the underworld would be the river stuff, and the heavens would be the sky. That's the rivers and the stars. That's where that came from. And so that was a ceremony. These were actual, like, if you will, ceremonies where people came and, like, you know, it was done with structure and purpose and so forth. And I would also say that this is a ceremony. And this right here is an occultic ceremony. The participants of this are not necessarily aware that they are stepping into a ceremony, but make no mistake, like, how the paradigm works is through these acts of hidden or occultic ceremonies, whether they be a Super Bowl halftime show or an opening ceremony of the Olympics. Like, these are ceremonies. So we see these two ceremonies, which are both river and stars, which are timed at the same event, and are linked and are linked in a certain harmony of consciousness. So we're going to move on. 171 days later, September 26. Hurricane Helene hits, it goes landfall, and then it leads to the Asheville, North Carolina flooding. And we probably all remember this. I made quite a few videos covering this, particularly the Helene and the flooding, and I tied it into the River and Stars ceremony because the final location on the River and Stars was done on the French Broad River at Asheville, North Carolina. The French Broad River was selected because there's a resonance with the Susquehanna River. There's a lot of resonance, but it it resonates. I mean, I don't want to go too deep into this, but through the relationship of the Susquehanna resonates to an ancient river name called the Sequana, which referred to both a river and the goddess tied to the river, which was then worshipped. And this goes back to the Celtic culture, and that river Sequana was eventually renamed the Seine, which is the river that runs through Paris. But the Seine and the Sequana are the same body of water with different names. And so Susquehanna and Sequana, there's a correspondence. And I've gone into this many times. Here's a video that was released in 2020 talking about Sequana and the French connection to the Susquehanna. And so the French Broad and the Susquehanna River are remarkably old. They're amongst the oldest rivers in the world. They're both around 325 million years old. Just to give, according to paradigm geologists. And to give you a point of reference, like the Nile, I think, is like 30 million years old. Like this is, whatever this realm is and whatever flowing water is, like this is the oldest flow. Like whatever that may be, like the Susquehanna fits in that, and in very rare air being estimated to be more than 300 million years old, as does the French Broad. There are only a handful, maybe 4 rivers on Earth that are said to be this old. And so the French Broad and the Sequana are related both in time. They have been flowing for a very, very, almost the same amount of time. And then in location, they're both found on the eastern side of North America or the United States. And then the French Broad by name, like broad implies to a certain extent a woman. You know, it's a little bit of a derogatory term, an old-fashioned derogatory term for a woman. But French Broad River is like the French woman. And we know that the Susquehanna is implying like the Sequana, which was a French goddess or became a French goddess. There was no France around when, or no municipality known as France in the time of Sequana or the Celtic culture on that part of land. But we can see this resonance. And so we're building from that. So the fact that Hurricane Helene eventually leads to this French Broad flooding in Asheville, you know, there's a connection. That's why that is a key point in this container of time, this Asheville French Broad flooding, and how we see it ties into this other sort of river stuff. So now let's go to this endpoint, July 4th. So this is 452 days from April 8th and 281 days from when Helene went landfall, and probably 279 days from when Asheville started to flood. To the Kerrville, Texas flooding. So we're probably all aware of this July 2025 Central Texas flooding. And this is like a big story during this time of like really, really like heightened big stories being told through media. The hardest hit by the floods was Kerr County, where the Guadalupe River was rapidly overwhelmed by heavy rain on July 4th. The river rose more than 20 feet in a matter of hours. I mean, we're not even talking about like how or why, what causes the flood, whether it's this one or even Hurricane Helene or the flooding of Asheville. We're just like looking at the level of reality in the fact that it happened. And we see, though, that several locations were downstream and it moved towards Kerrville. This is like, you know, it's named in the mainstream articles. And so we see, again, we've got the Kerrville eclipse, we've got the Kerrville flood, and it's where this eclipse took place was right on the Guadalupe River. So when we look at the name Guadalupe, it's primarily a Spanish name with several possible origins of meaning, but it's often associated with Virgin Mary in the Catholic tradition. So now we have a little bit of a different flavor of quote-unquote river goddess worship, whereas we can look at the Virgin Mary in some ways as a Christianized version of goddess worship. So there's that similarity. And we could even take it a step further when we're looking at France and the Seine or the Sequana, because if you're familiar with France as a culture or as a country, that country's culture, the Virgin Mary is rather significant. Isis is rather significant. Sequana is significant, but we can see how that's built upon it. But just from a Catholicism perspective, like France is like Virgin Mary is very significant in that country, more so than you would find in other Catholic countries throughout Europe. And so, I mean, we're not even going to get into the River of Wolves as another possibility of the name, but we're just going to sit with this, like, this Virgin Mary and Guadalupe and Sequana, and we'll just kind of like sit there and we see this resonance. We see that there's a connection there. So now I want to fill in some more of the dates in between this container of time from April 8th to July 4th. So July 14th is when the Asheville River and Stars, where the Asheville River and Stars event took place in Asheville, North Carolina. And then 14 days later was the opening ceremony for the Paris Olympics. Again, another mainstream paradigm ceremony. And this is even a named ceremony. It's called the opening ceremony of the Olympics, but we see that. And then overlapping this in time, I went and I took a trip to the underworld, if you will, the Hispaniola. I went to Dominican Republic for 2 weeks. And in fact, this was the original flyer created for the River and Stars. It was originally the conclusion of the ceremony was to go to the Rio Grande River in New Mexico. That did not happen, but a trip to the Dominican Republic occurred, and I made plenty of videos about that last fall. But that, in hindsight now is, that's kind of, it ties into it. Particularly, the Rio Grande is a different river that goes through Texas. And then there was the conclusion of returning all the river water to the Susquehanna and Falmouth. And that did occur. But going back to this time frame, as opposed to going out to the Dominican or the Rio Grande, the plan changed a little bit and was a trip to the Dominican Republic. About, 6 weeks later, the Asheville floods hit. Then there was I took a trip to Austin, Texas. Then we have this Blue Origin, all woman, all female, trip into outer space. That is a mainstream ceremony, but occultic. And then we have the Confluence Festival in Kerrville, Texas on May 7th. And then on July 4th, very close to where all of this takes place, we have this Guadalupe River Camp Mystic biblical devastation flood. So let's go look at this river goddess ceremony in Paris, which took place on July 27th. The opening ceremony will be a unique event taking place on the Seine River. So remember, the Seine and the Sequana. The Seine River, its ancient name was the Sequana. The Seine River was known as Sequana. It was also the name of the Celtic goddess associated with the river source. So Seine and Sequana are the same. So when we look at this, The opening ceremony takes place on the Sequana River rather than a traditional stadium. So this is unlike any other Olympic opening ceremony in the fact that it's literally on the river. And if you recall what happened or what was going on with this story, this opening ceremony on the Olympics, like, it was very controversial because some viewers thought that it was a disrespectful acting out of Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper. So the Last Supper is a painting of really the Passover Seder that Jesus and his disciples had, prior to the crucifixion. This plays a big part of the Easter story. And so along the opening ceremony, there was a bunch of men in drag who were seemingly mocking the Last Supper, and then there was this blue guy in front. So the blue man was at this year's opening ceremony defends his Olympic event. Regardless of whatever your personal opinion is of what this was, like, it really happened. Like, this was the play. This was like men dressed as women, and it had like a Catholicism narrative built into it, and then there was this blue dude in the middle. Like, this really happened on the river. Interestingly, like, this was a video which I published on July 27th, so the day after this. Like, I wasn't doing this on purpose, but this video was all about the starboard, CERN, and timeline manipulation. So this is how my journey was in time, tied in. My journey in time as marked by the videos that were released, like how that ties into the timing of this. So let's go a little bit deeper with the blue man. The blue man, he was expressed as being like an expression of the Greek god Dionysus, but there's also a very obvious connection to Lord Vishnu, the Vedic character god, the blue skin god. And we can see here, there's a similarity in terms of this pose, the coloring, even the headdress. It's a little bit different, but we could see it's similar. And particularly last year, like I'm not a Vedic scholar by any stretch, but I'm somewhat familiar, and with that culture and those stories. But what I'm very aware of is how this quote, I am become death, the destroyer of worlds, and how that tied in through to the nuclear program in Hollywood and Oppenheimer, like that's all connected. But this idea of Vishnu and death, and just as a theme, and we're going to come back to that in a moment. But this is built into the of what's resonating with Vishnu, this quote and this idea of death. So we're going to switch gears a little bit, and we're going to go to this blue origin, April 14th, 2024, 1 year and 1 week after the eclipse. There was this mission, and this was highly publicized because it was all women, and there was kind of celebrities. The most famous celebrity at the time was Katy Perry. And this was just really, this kind of fell flat in the way the public received it, I suppose. It seemed a little bit hokey. Maybe it was all fake. Whatever it was, like, it happened, and there was a charge with it. And this Blue Origin launch site also happens in Texas. So here, this is it. This is the video of this New Shepard mission NS-31 and the webcast of showing it. And it was launched at this place called the Van Horn Rocket Ranch, is the launch site one where this took place. at launch site 1. That's right here. And this launch site 1, here's the facility in Van Horn, Texas. And this is its location, its relationship to this spot right here, which is Guadalupe Peak, Texas. Guadalupe Peak is the highest natural point in Texas. This is not the Guadalupe River, but through naming, it is connected, and even through municipal space, it's both within Texas. So we've got this water Guadalupe, and now we've got this Peak Guadalupe. And there's just this weird bleed through, like this map. All of these directions are all driven by, you know, the internet and computer programming algorithms and so forth. And there's also some correspondence built into there. Like, it says that this is a 54-minute ride and it's taking you down 54. And just recognizing just how these numbers are just kind of showing up, not reading too much into them, but recognizing they're showing up, and they're showing up through this lens of the internet or the computer, the AI, whatever you want to go and define it. So now let's go look at this Blue Origin launch site to Kerrville. This is Kerrville right here. And we see that it says, oh, it's 5 hours and 40 minutes right now, which is a multiple of 10, if you will, of 54 minutes to now 5 hours and 40 minutes. And now it's on Route 10. You know, there's just a funny play. There's a funny play. This is Guadalupe River. Here we've got, like, right here is probably Peak Guadalupe, but this is just kind of like, this is in the background. We're just noting this. We're seeing where this is. Kerrville, we don't really see it so much on this map, but this is San Antonio, and like right here is Austin, so it's kind of in that general area. So let's go back to this launch. So this was highly hyped, and it just felt fake, and it looks like this, the whole Marvel story, which is infiltrating media right now, whether that be movies or TV shows, but this Marvel franchise is bleeding through, and there's a play here with it, like it's playing off of one another. And just to lean a little bit, like marvel is to be filled with wonder or astonishment. That's what marvel means. And astonishment is a great surprise. So when they're talking about marvel, there's a in the name is encoded that it's dealing with a great surprise, whatever that great surprise would be. But let's keep going down this path. So at the time of the launch, arguably this Katy Perry character, this like fake looking image of Katy Perry in the Blue Origin was probably the most like charged of the characters that were in this play that was being told to the collective consciousness. And when we look at this and we're like, okay, we know that there's a general Marvel overlap in the way this is being presented. The question is like, well, what does this image, like what Marvel character is this playing with the most? And I'm going to suggest it's this Marvel character right here, who's from the Marvel spin-off called Agatha All Along. And so in Agatha All Along series, this character, her name is Rio Vidal. So Rio means river. That's what Rio means. So this is a river. And this character is the manifestation of death itself. So now we've got this like death river right here, right? And so we're beginning to look at this comparison of the blue man and his relationship with death, and the blue woman and her relationship of death and river. And we're also, remember, the blue man is tied in with like the male as woman, the hermaphroditic, however you want to think of as drag. There is definitely a play within quote unquote genders or emerging of genders, and we're kind of seeing the same thing of death and river and genders and blue just built into this narrative. So now the mystery really comes alive, and we're going to talk about Camp Mystic for Girls in Kerrville, Texas. And so this was the story which really personalized the flooding in Texas, was that this all-girls Christian camp on the Guadalupe called Camp Mystic was washed away. And in my opinion, this had a very similar feeling as the Sandy Hook story in terms of the emotional play on the collective. But Camp Mystic, like just that word mystic is getting a lot of resonance in the storyline. So where's Camp Mystic? This is where Camp Mystic is located. Right here is Guadalupe River, and this is Cypress Creek. And Camp Mystic is at this confluence of Cypress Creek and the Guadalupe River. We can see it here in satellite. Here's the creek. Here's the river. This is what flooded all the way. So now we're going to add on to this build. On May 7th through 12th of this calendar year. So we've got the Asheville flood. Then on April 14th, we've got the space or the Blue Origin launch, and then 3 weeks later, we've got this Confluence ceremony festival in Kerrville, Texas. And so let's go look at that for a little bit. So this is actually a festival that is called Confluence. And so let's first look at this for a moment. Set on Sovereignty Ranch, a regenerative farm in Bandera, Texas, just outside of San Antonio. From my perspective, it looks more triangulated also with Austin. There is this unique gathering that offers an opportunity to connect deeply with nature and one another. Confluence features a hands-on workshops, mind-blowing lectures, movement classes, experiences, and live music across 3 stages running simultaneously, creating a one-of-a-kind of event tailored exactly to whatever journey your soul came to be. So this was Confluence 2025. And I would say, like, it's different than the River and Stars ceremony, or that cosmic geomancy thing, which I was involved with. But I would say that this concept is very much in alignment with the energy which was behind, or the impetus behind, those River and Stars ceremony. And the Confluence Festival is one of the organizers is Alex Zeck and his Way Forward organization and podcast, which educates, empowers, and unites men and women from all walks of life to connect with their inherent divinity, natural healing capacity, and innate freedom while dissolving societal conditioning and seeking truth and fostering a deeper sense of coherence within themselves and the world. Like, there is a very strong complementariness between at least my approach to reality and what we're seeing here. I wasn't part of the Confluence Festival, but there's certainly a resonance with it. And this is where the Confluence Festival took place. Confluence means the junction of two rivers. And we've seen that over and over again. This is where the River and Star ceremony started, at the confluence, the primary confluence of the Susquehanna River, where the west branch and the north branch of the river meet. Camp Mystic was at a confluence. Even the French Broad ceremony of the River and Stars tour was also at a confluence. So there's a resonance there, and even go one step further. Confluence 2025, there was also a Confluence 2024, which took place on April 5th through the 8th, coinciding with the solar eclipse. So this Confluence Festival was already in alignment with the April 8th date. This is where the Kerrville is, where the floods are, where Mystic is. This is Austin. Austin is where the Way Forward podcast is out of. And we just see this connection. The Sovereignty Ranch is 16.77 miles from actually Louise Hay Park, where the Kerrville viewing took place. And interestingly enough, I was on the Way Forward podcast. That was released on December 9th, 2024. That was what this trip to Austin for me was about, to go on this podcast. I was unaware of the Confluence Festival from previous in that year, or the one which would be 2025. I was just invited to go on the podcast. And here, this episode talked about skywalking, or arrow circulation, paradigm, synchromysticism, and so forth. November 7th is when it was recorded, and was recorded in person in Austin, Texas. So let's go back to Confluence of this past year. And one of the headline speakers is a woman by the name of Veda Austin. And if you're not familiar with Veda Austin's work, it's all about water. And here's a quote which I found on her website. "Water is the rebel element. It won't conform to the laws of physics or gravity, and it can't be killed. So there's no death with water. Without it, there's no life. It reincarnates for all of us to see, and science tells us it came to Earth from outer space. Rebellious, nonconformist, eternal, and alien, just like the power we're all filled with." River and Stars. And Veda. The Vedas are the meaning of knowledge, the oldest text of Hinduism. This is all Vedic. This here is Vedic. This character right here, Vedic goddess in the river. So we're seeing the same symbols of the same thing showing up. Water cannot be killed, yet we're seeing all of this death symbology, but it's just symbology, because we know that water cannot be killed. What it's talking about, or what it seemingly is referring to, is the regenerative life-death process of the outer apparent life-death purpose run through the never-ending unfoldment of life, which actually never dies. And so, on July 6th, on the Way Forward podcast, and I encourage everyone, if you haven't listened to these, to go listen to it, is when Veda Austin's her episode is released. And so we can see this structure, or this order, in the seemingly chaotic or non-planned unfoldment of life, that the more chaos there is, there's also, the closer you look, the more order there is. And so it's with that, my friends, that that I walk you through this presentation. And what I would hope, particularly for those of you that have hung around for this full presentation, demonstration, experience, is that you just meet it with the lightness of a feather. And by doing so, there's no weight. There is a softness which allows something else to emerge. And what that something else is, well, we don't know. The moment we name it, we begin to limit its expression. So if it is possible to hold that space in consciousness, well, then you have created the room for whatever's happening right now. Because make no mistake, there are shifts and there are movements that are happening in this realm which we're experiencing together. When you can hold the space for life to unfold within you without a definition of what it will be, well, then it can show itself in a new way. A new expression can take place. So with that, my friends, feel free to reach out to me. This type of work is intimately connected with what I call natural astrology. For natural astrology is a practice which again creates room and space for life to unfold within you without limitations. And this is what the practice of the inner calendar and the personal holy days are. My last video, I talked about it. Following the inner calendar is as universal as recognizing your quote-unquote birthdays. So I highly recommend to all of you who if this makes sense to you, if like this type of meeting reality for allowing something new and true to unfold, well then figure out your inner calendar, your personal holy days. Rewatch that video. I express how you can figure it out yourself, or if you need me to do it for you, well then send me an email. But either way, this is part, or this supports that same type of meeting reality. So I appreciate the time. I appreciate the attention, and keep your eyes open and peeled for more instructional videos to come.